Welcome to History's Mysteries, a place where the echoes of the past linger in the quiet of night. Here, forgotten worlds awaken softly, and the stories of time unfold like dreams. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let history whisper you to sleep. The forts of forgotten time. The world is hushed tonight, and you drift through the folds of history as if through mist. The air is cool, and distant mountains fade into shadow. Before you lies a land that remembers the stones of ancient walls, the towers of forgotten keeps. They stand silent, still guarding secrets time could not erase. You walk softly, as if not to wake the ghosts who linger there. High in the Himalayas, the first of these fortresses awaits. Roopkund, where the air is thin and the snow glows faintly under the moon. Near its ruins lies a frozen lake filled with hundreds of bones, perfectly preserved in ice. They say a storm once swept across the mountain, and those who journeyed toward the fort were struck down by hail the size of fists. Were they pilgrims? Were they soldiers sent to guard some hidden pass? The skeletons stare upward through the ice, as though still watching for the sky to clear. Wind whispers between the stones, carrying a sound almost like prayer or a warning. Far to the west, where the desert meets the Dead Sea, another fortress rises from rock and dust, Masada. Its steep cliffs glow red beneath the setting sun. Here, Jewish rebels once stood against the might of Rome. When the Romans finally breached the walls, the story goes that all inside had chosen death over capture. Yet, beneath the sands, archaeologists have found signs of something quieter, the meals they shared, the messages they carved into stone, as though life continued long after the legend says it ended. The fortress remains still, heavy with silence, as if the truth itself cannot decide which tale to tell. The sound of waves pulls you onward, warm, tropical, and uneasy. The walls of Fort Charles in Jamaica tilt slightly toward the sea. Once proud and strong, half the fort vanished when the earth shook in 1692 and the ocean swallowed the city of Port Royal. Divers still explore its ghostly remains, where doors hang open beneath the waves and muskets lie rusted in the sand. Some claim they have seen the silhouettes of soldiers standing guard in watery corridors, repeating their duty forever beneath the tide. From the Caribbean's warmth to the hidden jungles of India, there is a fortress that does not show itself. Bhangarh, the lost stronghold of the ancient epics. It is said celestial beings built it in a single night, its towers glowing with divine light. Yet no explorer, no satellite, has found more than fragments of old walls buried beneath vines. Perhaps it sank into the earth, or slipped into the stories of gods who once walked among men. The air there hums softly, as though the ground itself remembers where it used to stand. The mist clears, and you find yourself standing before the gates of Mycenae in Greece, its entrance crowned by two great lions carved from stone. They have guarded this place for 3,000 years, and their gaze has not softened. The blocks that form these walls are so vast that ancient peoples had giants build them, cyclopes who shaped the stones when the world was still young. The corridors still smell faintly of dust and olive oil, and if you listen closely, you can hear the echo of bronze striking bronze, the sound of a civilization that believed its kings could speak with the gods. Across the plains of Rajasthan, India glows gold beneath a burning sky. Chittorgarh Fort rises from the earth like a sandstone crown, its towers and temples shimmer in the heat. Here, the story of Queen Padmini unfolds. Her beauty is said to have sparked war. When the siege came and defeat was certain, the women of the fort chose fire over capture. They walked into the flames as the men rode out to meet death. Even now, villagers speak of nights when the air grows warm and faint music rises from the fort, as if the souls who burned still dance in the light they created. Beyond the cliffs of Northumberland stands Dunstanburgh Castle, its ruins etched against a cold grey sea. The wind moans through the empty halls, carrying the tale of a black-armoured knight who walks the battlements at dusk. He was once a lord betrayed by his kin, struck down before his time. Now fishermen claim to see him standing at the edge of the cliffs, his armour glinting faintly, watching for ships that never come. The sea below churns endlessly, yet he remains, a guardian of sorrow, waiting for peace that never arrives. In the heart of Manila, shadows linger inside Fort Santiago. Its stone corridors lead to dungeons that once held prisoners of war. When the gates were sealed during the Second World War, those within vanished without trace. Soldiers who occupied the fort later spoke of whispers echoing through the tunnels, the clinking of unseen chains, the soft murmur of prayers spoken by voices long gone. Some say the air itself remembers suffering, and when night falls, the fort exhales it. You rise above the canopy of Sri Lanka, where the great Sigiriya, the sky fortress, perches atop a solitary rock. Water gardens glisten below like mirrors, and ancient frescoes of celestial maidens smile from the walls. Its king once built this citadel to live among the clouds, but after his death the place was abandoned, left to vines, rain, and myth. Who truly designed its genius? A mortal king or minds from another age? The polished walls still reflect sunlight, as if the builders wished to capture heaven itself within stone. In the mountains of Iran lies the broken remains of Alamut, the assassin's fortress. It was said that from here a hidden order ruled with shadows and secrets, men who could strike fear into kings. Beneath its walls once lay vast libraries of knowledge, scrolls of science, philosophy, and mystery. When the Mongols came, fire consumed it all, and the tunnels sealed themselves beneath rubble. Yet somewhere below, many believed the last keeper hid what was most precious, wisdom meant for a world not yet ready to understand it. Across the sea, off the cliffs of Western Ireland, the ancient fort of Dunangus teeters at the edge of the Atlantic. Its semicircular walls end abruptly in air, the cliff dropping away into endless sea. No rear defences, no safety, only the roaring wind. Some say the builders sought not protection, but communion with the ocean itself, raising stone walls where earth and water meet eternity. The stones here hum with salt and age, and seabirds wheel above like guardians of a forgotten right. Further north, traces of the lost forts of Hadrian's Wall sleep beneath English soil. The Romans built dozens along that long frontier, but a few are missing, erased without fire, without record. Excavations reveal the outlines of roads that lead nowhere, and gates that open into earth. It is as though the forts themselves stepped quietly out of history, leaving behind only the faint impression of their absence. Sometimes, after a rain, the patterns reappear in the grass, ghosts of empire drawn in green and shadow. In Syria, the Crac de Chevalier rises like a dream of geometry. Crusader knights once called it the perfect fortress, walls within walls, towers arranged with mathematical grace. Even today, engineers marvel at its design, how air and water still flow through hidden channels as if the stones breathe. Beneath its chapel, tunnels spiral into darkness, and though war has scarred its surface, the heart of the fortress endures, serene, balanced, timeless. Then comes Bhangarh Fort, deep in the forests of Rajasthan, often called the most haunted fort in the world. Local legend tells of a sorcerer who cursed it, binding all who dwell within. After sunset, the gates are locked, for those who enter at night are said never to return. Yet in daylight, it feels almost kind. Green courtyards filled with birdsong, broken archways framing the sky. Still an unease lingers, as if the stones themselves hold their breath when the sun begins to fall. In the highlands of Peru, the stones of Sacsayhuaman shimmer with precision. Enormous blocks, carved to impossible exactness, interlock without mortar. Each weighs as much as a locomotive, yet they fit so closely that not even a blade of grass can slide between them. How the builders achieved this remains a riddle. One whispered in the thin mountain air. Locals say the stones were once soft, molded like clay by the touch of gods, then hardened by the sun. The walls form a pattern, part fortress, part symbol, as if defending both the city and the secret of its creation. On a lonely mountain in France, Montségur still clings to the sky. In 1244 it fell to crusaders, and hundreds of Catholic believers perished in the flames below. But before that final day, 4 of them escaped through secret tunnels, carrying a hidden treasure. Some say it was gold, others a relic beyond price. Perhaps even the Holy Grail itself. When the sun sets over Montségur, its shadow falls like a cross over the valley, and the wind carries whispers of what might still lie beneath the rock. In Edinburgh, the castle stands proud above the city, ancient, watchful, and cold. Long ago, a piper was sent into the tunnels beneath it, his music echoing so that those above could trace his path. But halfway through the warren of stone, the sound stopped. The piper was never seen again. Some nights, faint strains of his tune rise from underfoot, mingling with the wind. The city goes on sleeping, unaware that somewhere below, a melody still wanders, unfinished. Farther east, on the plains of Anatolia, lie the ruins of Troy. For centuries it was thought a myth, a city born from poetry. Then spades struck stone, and legend became reality. Yet Troy revealed itself not as one city, but many. Built, destroyed, and rebuilt, layer upon layer. Which of them was the Troy of Achilles and Hector? Which walls heard the cries of war? The stones say nothing. They simply endure, glowing red at dusk like embers that refuse to die. By the shores of Acre, Israel, the fortress stands half buried beneath the modern city. Acre Fortress, once home to Crusader kings, hides an underworld of tunnels, vaults, and sealed chambers untouched since the 13th century. Some are said to contain treasure, others records of lost orders. Every few decades a new passage is uncovered, leading deeper still, as though the fortress itself is slowly revealing its secrets, only to those patient enough to listen to its silence. And then, as your journey nears its end, you arrive in Cairo, where the fortress of Babylon sleeps beneath layers of history. Romans built upon older ruins, and the city grew above it like time piled in stone. Deep below, sealed by earth and memory, lie foundations from the days of the pharaohs, passages no one dares to open. Some say the fort's deepest chambers hold relics that could rewrite Egypt's story. Others believe they guard something better, left undisturbed. Above, the city hums with life, below, eternity wakes. The wind quiets, the echoes fade. Around you, the world of fortresses begins to dissolve into a dream. The stones that once stood so solid now shimmer, melting into mist. The mountains, the deserts, the cliffs by the sea, all drift away like memories waking from a long sleep. Yet their stories remain, carved into the silence of time, carried by the night itself. The world has always built walls, to defend, to protect, and to remember. But even the strongest walls become ruins, and even ruins whisper. And as you drift further into stillness, those whispers follow, soft, distant, eternal. The voices of fortresses that have not forgotten.
Welcome to History's Mysteries, a place where the echoes of the past linger in the quiet of night. Here, forgotten worlds awaken softly, and the stories of time unfold like dreams. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let history whisper you to sleep. The wind moved like a silver thread across the rocky spine of Tegerus, whispering the names of boys who had once chased goats and shadows, and were now men sharpening bronze on stone. Leonidas remembered them as he walked the night roads of Sparta, a king whose house was as austere as a soldier's tent, and whose heart was stitched to the laws like a shield strap to a wrist. The city slept with one eye open. The Agagye had taught every child to dream in watchfulness, to hear the scrape of fate long before it arrived. At the Eurotas, the water ran cold and uncomplaining, and stars blinked as if frost had settled on their lids. Leonidas dipped his hands, drank, and tasted the tiny bite of river stone. He had been told by oracles cryptic as caves that either the city or a king must be offered to the altar of necessity. He had walked away with the slow dignity of a man who knows the shape of his last errand. In the morning he announced a march, not with speeches. Spartans disliked words that ran farther than a spear throw, but with a list of names chosen under the two kings' weight and the old law's eye. 300. Husbands, fathers, the kind of men whose thoughts were weathered and whose hands smelled faintly of olive oil and iron. Each man polished his armor in silence, sharing with his bronze the questions he would not ask his wife. The women saw and understood, for Sparta raised its daughters to hold the city by its corners, while the sons tried to hold the world at a pass. Boys ran errands, too eager, and dogs watched with that canine grief that is only confusion sharpened by love. The elders stood beneath the porticos like knots in the planks of the city, and one of them, whose mouth had chewed the same laws for half a century, spat and said, "The road is narrow. That is our friend." The night before the march, Leonidas visited each house. He touched doorposts, thin as reeds beneath his palm, and spoke plainly to each woman. "I return by the laws, or I do not return." He did not promise anything else. In the barracks, the young conscripts not chosen watched the veterans with a kind of worship that had no need of altars. The chosen men ate barley bread and black broth, common fare with the flavor of finality, and then lay down and slept, as soldiers sleep the night before a thing that cannot be unwalked, briefly and well. At dawn, the 300 formed ranks that looked like a comb carved of ironwood. They were not the tallest men in Greece, nor the most adorned, but there was a geometry to them, a severe beauty that came from practicing the same motion until it rubbed a groove into the mind. Each man carried a shield large enough to shelter his neighbor, but not himself. For a Spartan did not draw a circle around his own life. He joined the circle held by all. sword, spear, breastplate, greaves, and the crimson cloak that told the enemy that the man before him had already bled in his imagination and would not be surprised by red. They set out with the earth cool underfoot and the sky like hammered copper. The road north lay thin and purposeful between vineyards and groves where a tree stood like soldiers at ease. Old men nodded at them and did not smile. Women stood with their chins high and did not wave. Children watched with hands held behind their backs so they would not reach toward the glitter and ask to touch. Travelers joined the column's edges like foam on a riverbank and then peeled away, carrying news forward in shoals. Sparta was moving. Greece would not kneel in the doorway without first filling the doorway with bone. Along the way they gathered allies, not many, but the kind who understand that a small stone in the right place can deflect a great wheel. Thespians came with a courage that had no advertisement and no excuse. Thebans came with a hesitance that belonged to their city's politics but not to their arms. Messengers ran with mouths like bellows, and the hills relayed their panting across ravines whose floors were packed with old battles gone to seed. The Persian Sea rolled on the horizon like a metal plate being dragged by invisible porters. The hosts of the great king were so many, they filled the gossip of crickets. From afar, a man could smell bitumen, horse sweat, cedar, garlic, and the particular iron smell that whole empires carry, like a badge. Sparta answered with cliffs and silence. Now all the roads drew toward the hot gates, the place the earth had narrowed with a craftsman's precision, so that the wide map could be argued at a human throat. They arrived at Thermopylae under a sky that had been polished by wind, and the springs breathed up their warm, egg-scented breath from the earth's mouth. The pass itself was a hard syllable, a stone word the sea hissed around when it was angry. Leonidas inspected the walls the Phocians had thrown across it, and ordered repairs with the thrift of a farmer mending a fence he means to lean against for the rest of the season. The men cut, stacked, hammered, and laughed briefly and savagely, the way men laugh when they have nothing left to bargain with except themselves. At night the camp hummed. Songs were not sung. Spartans did not sweeten their mouths before difficulty. They told small jokes, shook out their cloaks, and murmured to the bronze that it must be true to them tomorrow. Dienekes, whose wit moved like a fish in shallow water, said that a storm of Persian arrows would bring welcome shade. The young men laughed because it was good to pretend the world still contained ordinary inconveniences like weather. A helot tethered to his master's household slipped away for a moment and stood beside the steaming spring. He closed his eyes, and the warm ghost of the earth's blood threaded the bones of his feet. He thought of nothing sacred and everything real. Bread, women, a field left fallow too long, and the way a spear warms in the hand after the third hour of holding. Dawn the next day raised a brass lid quietly, and the first of the Persian waves came with banners and drums and confidence. They expected a road. They found a locked door and 300 keys that fit it. The Medes tested the line like wolves testing a herd, clever and fast and good at finding weakness where men sleep late. The Spartans did not sleep. Their shields kissed, their spears spoke, and the front rank's feet drew shallow trenches in the dust, marking the edge beyond which no man from Asia would step that day. The slaughter was not theatrical. It was meticulous. Men died in the way of men who believe their death can be made useful. with their hands learning a precise tenderness toward the weapons that must carry their last intentions. The narrowness required patience more than fury, and the Spartans were patient men, raised to count to 10 while being struck, and to answer not with tears, but with numbers. When the first waves broke and rolled back, Persia discovered that the pass was not a hill to be taken with a shout, but a craft to be practiced against a crabbed master. More came. The immortals, the great king's 10,000 most dearly named, their scale armor shining like fish in a river too proud to remember the sea. They were swift and lovely in an open field. Here they were like swans forced to walk. The Spartans let them come on and broke their spears, and when the shafts splintered, the swords were drawn, leaf-shaped blades optimized for the intimate grammar of necessity. The fighting went to a lower register. There was little room for style. A man could only be accurate, and accuracy is a kind of reverence when the world has been reduced to an argument between two ribs. The day scorched the skin. The hot springs poured breath like a wounded bull behind the wall. The sea whispered, tireless. Leonidas moved along the line, an instrument checking its strings. He did not speak to inflame. He spoke to correct, to remind, to keep the geometry exact. A spear point a hand's breadth too high meant the neighbor's throat was a hand's breadth too unguarded. The Thespians held with a devotion that had not been advertised in any festival, and the Thebans held with a grimness born of knowing that sometimes a man is judged not by what he chooses, but by where he stands when he no longer has a choice. Night came like wetted wool laid over fire. The Greeks slept in ships, and those who did not sleep sat with their backs to the wall and listened to the springs whisper. Leonidas dreamed of nothing. He had given his dreams back to the city when he was a boy and had never reclaimed them. Somewhere on the black slope above, a man whose back ached from years of labor considered a different wage. Ephialtes was his name, and he carried in his mouth the taste of envy, a bitter seed that grows in men who have learned too early the exact measure of their own height. He knew a path, goat narrow and twig loud, that curled around the pass's shoulder like a hidden vein. He took it to the Persians in exchange for gold that would not feed him as well as honor would have, had he ever tasted honor. The Phocians guarding the path startled awake at the soft thunder of many feet and fought hard, but the hillside carried the enemy down it the way a bowl carries water down to the lip. In the gray before dawn, a messenger came to Leonidas as if arriving from the end of a long road that did not lead anywhere else. The news required no commentary. The king made 3 decisions with the economy of a man still living under law, even when the law could no longer shelter him. He sent most of the allies away to fight another day. He kept the Thebans, who could not be trusted to go, but would be useful to stay. And he shaped his 300 into a sentence the world would remember. They advanced beyond the wall to a wider place, where more men could die at once. The Persians came from the front and rear, and the sky learned the geometry of arrows. The Spartan spears shortened themselves by breaking, as if the wood had decided to be knives instead of staffs, and the men shifted to swords whose leaf curves were made for the rib-spaced corridors of close fighting. There is a moment in battle when the body considers desertion, but the mind reminds it that the feet belong to something larger. There is another when the mind seeks an excuse, but the body has already chosen, on the basis of old drills and older vows, to remain. The 300 passed through both moments quietly and arrived at a third, the one in which a man recognizes that dignity is a kind of gravity. Leonidas fell where kings should fall, not on a throne, but in a threshold. The fight swirled around his body like wind around a pillar. 4 times the Persians were pushed back from his corpse, and 4 times they returned, until possession meant less than devotion, and the men holding the body understood they held the city by the ankle. At last, surrounded and reduced, the Greeks stood together as if forming the final paragraph of a long law. They died slowly and well, and not alone. The pass accepted them with that generosity peculiar to narrow places, which know how to honor those who accept limitation without complaint. When the killing grew thin and the screams ran out of ink, the Persians raised heads on spears, as if erecting punctuation at the end of a sentence they did not write. The sea exhaled, the springs steamed, the cliffs remembered. Southward the rumor ran with feet of rumor, that at Thermopylae 300 men had taught the world how to calculate, how to find the numbers in a narrow place and make them suffice. In cities with more poems than soldiers, the people paused and stood differently, as if a weight had been hung upon their spines by invisible hands. The mothers of Sparta received the news as women trained to carry it, not because they were made of stone, but because they were made of woven reeds, and reeds know how to bend and still bind. A boy asked his mother whether his father had been afraid. She answered that fear and courage drink from the same cup, but courage keeps the hand steady. In Athens, men carved plans into wood and prepared ships as if sharpening oars could change the weather. In Plataea, farmers counted spears the way they once counted seeds. Across the sea, the great king moved forward, but he did not move as quickly as before, for even kings must pass through gates sized for men. Years rolled, folding one another like cloaks. Salamis and Plataea were born at the spending at Thermopylae. The arithmetic checked out. Poets found the line that would crown the hill and give passers-by a mouthful of salt and iron. Stranger, tell the Lacedaemonians that we lie here, obedient to their laws. Travelers came with sandals dusty from other griefs. They pressed their palms to the stone and felt the low pulse of something that refused to be merely legend. The place kept its heat in winter and gave it back at night like a body that remembers being alive. Children learned too. Spell freedom with 300 letters, and then to pronounce it with their own lips differently when they were old enough to have something to lose. Leonidas did not become larger in death. He became exact. The measure of a city is sometimes the size of a doorway. Sometimes it is the size of the man who chooses to fill it. In Spartan houses afterward, the doors were still narrow, the tables plain, and the laws strict as bootlaces. And yet a looseness entered the city too. A knowledge that not every problem is solved by staying home. The boys of later years practiced their steps at the war dance with a new care, understanding that grace is not ornament, but accuracy gentle to itself. The Persian Empire's wealth grew and waned like a tide that forgets the moon. Greece quarreled with itself and then with itself again. The world widened until it held Rome, and then the world learned Latin ways to speak of Greek stubbornness. Thermopylae stood through all that as a proposition about ratios and responsibility. When a traveler pauses there in any century and listens, he can hear, just beyond the rustle of reed and the simmer of spring, a sentence spoken by men whose tongues have long since dissolved into the earth. Hold the line that is your size. Do not make promises bigger than your doorway. Do not abandon the doorway, because bigger men might arrive tomorrow. If they do, you will have made the place ready for them. If they do not, you will have still made the place ready for someone smaller, who will call you ancestor in his heart. The wind continues its silver threading, fined with salt. The sea continues to smooth its knuckles against the shore. The pass keeps breathing its warm breath into the colder air, and the stone resists and then consents to moss in slow green letters. The story remains not because it is loud, but because it is exact, like the angle at which a shield must turn a spear, like the width of a road that can be held by the width of a life. And in Sparta, when autumn comes and the olives are pressed, an old woman stands at her doorway and stares north when the evening star appears. She does not weep. The city does not teach weeping, but it also does not forbid remembering. She remembers a boy who learned to sleep in thorns without complaint, and to steal cheese from an altar under a flogging. She remembers that he laughed once, head thrown back like a colt's, when a kite swooped low and stole a strip of meat from his hand. She tells him again in the private temple where mothers keep their sons long after the city has borrowed them, that he may return by the laws, and if he cannot, he may return in the laws. She closes the door because the night is chill, and in the act of closing it, she understands something about doors that no bronze inscription can say. In Plataea, an old thespian whose knees ache in rain rises with the stick to fetch water. He pauses to breathe and looks toward the east, where the light troubles the clouds. He sees in the steam of his breath the shape of a shield, and in the bend of his stick the humor of Dienicus. And he smiles, and the smile hurts, and he keeps walking. Far away, a Persian veteran who lived and married and now sells spices to mothers with bargaining eyes watches his son play with a tin soldier at the threshold of the shop. He does not stop the game. He tells the boy, when asked, that some gates teach a lesson that makes a man richer, even if he cannot repeat it. He is not ashamed. He has learned that surviving a story is one of the ways a man can serve it, and the pass keeps its breath and its proportion. The world will bring again in every age an army made of many colors and one intention. It will also bring again a narrow place where numbers are humbled by angles and by the weight of vows. The 300 have no need to rise from the ground. They have already taken their posts beneath our feet. When we walk hard and straight upon our errands, when we lend our shield to the neighbor's side, and when we meet betrayal with exactness rather than rage and danger with attention rather than noise, we are simply relieving them from the watch for a little while. The wind approves. The sea approves. The old stones do not speak, but if they did, they would say only what Leonidas said and never elaborate. Stand.
Welcome to History's Mysteries, a place where the echoes of the past linger in the quiet of night. Here, forgotten worlds awaken softly, and the stories of time unfold like dreams. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let history whisper you to sleep. The world was not yet quiet when the last years before Christ began to slip through the sands of time. Rome stood at the height of its glory and the edge of its undoing, vast and shining, a city of triumphs and marble, where every street echoed with ambition. Yet beneath the weight of its columns and the hum of its markets, something in the heart of the Republic trembled. Old virtues had grown thin, and the names of men now carried more power than the laws themselves. It was in this uneasy twilight that the storms of the Roman civil wars began, stretching across decades and continents, from the mountains of Gaul to the banks of the Nile. What began as rivalry would end as transformation, as the world of the Republic slowly gave way to empire. The year was 49 BCE, and the river Rubicon flowed quietly through the countryside of northern Italy. Julius Caesar stood upon its banks, the mist of winter clinging to his crimson cloak. Behind him stretched the legions that had conquered Gaul, men hardened by frost and hunger, bound to their commander by loyalty deeper than law. Before him lay the frontier of Italy, sacred to the Republic. To cross it with an army was treason, a challenge to the Senate and to Pompey the Great, once his ally, now his rival. Caesar's mind was steady, but the weight of the choice pressed like iron. He knew that if he returned to Rome as a private citizen, his enemies would destroy him. If he crossed, the world would change. The river murmured softly beneath the pale sky. Caesar raised his hand, as though listening to something distant and unseen, and said that the die was cast. The horse moved forward, the legions followed. The Rubicon was crossed, and with it, the peace of centuries ended. Pompey fled Rome as panic gripped the city. Senators packed their treasures and escaped southward, taking the treasury with them. Rome, once the mistress of the world, was abandoned to the echoes of its own fear. Caesar entered without resistance. He moved swiftly, gathering control of Italy, then turning west to face Pompey's legates in Spain. The campaigns were swift, decisive, and without mercy. Caesar told his men that he was going to fight an army without a leader, then a leader without an army. Within months, Spain was his. Then he turned east toward Greece, where Pompey had gathered his strength. The two greatest soldiers of their age met upon the fields of Pharsalus in the summer heat of 48 BCE. Dust rose like smoke beneath the clash of legions. Pompey had numbers, cavalry, and nobles who believed victory was their right. Caesar had veterans, lean and silent, men who had followed him through Gaul's frozen rivers and across the Alps. When Pompey's cavalry charged, Caesar's hidden fourth line stepped forward and struck at their faces. The charge broke. Panic spread like fire. The Senate's army collapsed beneath the relentless push of Caesar's veterans. When the battle was done, Caesar walked among the fallen and whispered that they would have done the same to him. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking safety among the Ptolemies. But Egypt was not a place of mercy. On the shore near Pelusium, assassins sent by the young king Ptolemy the 13th struck him down. When Caesar arrived days later, they presented him with Pompey's severed head, expecting gratitude. He turned away and wept. That, he said, was not how greatness should end. In the glittering palaces of Alexandria, Caesar met Cleopatra, a queen of 21 years, shrewd and radiant, speaking as easily of philosophy as of power. She came to him hidden within a carpet, unrolled before his feet, and in that moment, alliance became intimacy. Together they waged war against her brother's forces, the waters of the Nile reflecting the fires of their battle. When victory came, Cleopatra ruled as queen beside her young son, rumored to be Caesar's own. For a season, Caesar lingered in Egypt, surrounded by incense and the soft murmur of the river. But Rome called him back, restless and divided. He returned triumphant, leading 4 great processions through the city for his victories in Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa. The people cheered until their voices broke. The Senate, half in awe and half in fear, named him dictator for life. The Republic had endured kings, tyrants, and invaders, but it had never endured one man with such power. Caesar spoke of reform, of mercy, of rebuilding the broken order, yet whispers began to grow like ivy on old stone. Too many honors, too much ambition. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, he left his house against all omens. The air was cool, the sky gray above the city's temples. In the Curia of Pompeii, senators surrounded him. Knives flashed, blades fell. The conqueror of Gaul was struck 23 times, his blood staining the marble floor at the feet of Pompey's statue. The republic that his killers claimed to save died with him. Rome descended into chaos once more. The Senate quarreled, the people rioted, and Caesar's will was read. To the astonishment of many, his heir was not a general, but a youth. Gaius Octavius, his grandnephew. Thin, pale, and untested, Octavian possessed something more powerful than experience. Caesar's name. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, sought to command his legacy, but Octavian moved with quiet precision. Legions swore loyalty to him. The two rivals met, then allied, forming the second triumvirate with Lepidus. Together they purged their enemies in a storm of blood. Cicero fell, the voice of the Republic silenced. The triumvirs marched east to confront Brutus and Cassius, the last defenders of liberty. On the plains of Philippi in 42 BCE, their armies met. The ground trembled beneath the weight of Roman steel. The air darkened with dust. When the fighting ended, Brutus and Cassius were dead, their dream of restoring the old republic buried with them. Octavian returned west to rule Italy. Antony took the east. Lepidus, forgotten, kept Africa. But power cannot be shared for long. In the east, Antony met Cleopatra. What Caesar had begun in alliance, Antony continued in devotion. Their bond was legend, 2 rulers bound by passion and politics, their courts glittering with gold and fragrance, their names whispered as gods of the new world. Yet in Rome, Octavian waged another kind of war, quieter and more lethal. He spoke to the Senate not of swords, but of honor, of Antony's weakness, of a Roman enslaved by an Egyptian queen. The people murmured. Statues of Antony and Cleopatra appeared in the forum, symbols of excess and betrayal. Rome's patience thinned. By 32 BCE, war was inevitable. On the western coast of Greece, near the promontory of Actium, the final reckoning came. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a vast fleet of glittering ships. Octavian's admiral Agrippa faced them with discipline and cunning. The morning sea was calm, but the air was heavy with omen. Trumpets blared, oars bit into the water, and the sky filled with smoke. For hours, ships rammed and burned. Then Cleopatra's golden flagship turned south, breaking the line. Some said she fled in fear, others that Antony followed love into ruin. His fleet collapsed. Octavian's victory was complete. The last hope of resistance drifted away with the smoke. The following year, Octavian entered Alexandria. There was no battle left to fight. Antony, broken by defeat, fell upon his sword. Cleopatra, refusing to be paraded through Rome, took her own life by the bite of an asp, her crown still upon her brow. Octavian stood over the city of the pharaohs, the last enemy gone, the world at his feet. Egypt became a Roman province, its wealth flowing to the Tiber. the doors of the temple of Janus were closed, signaling peace for the first time in a generation. Yet it was a peace built upon surrender. The Republic, that ancient dream of shared power, was gone. Octavian became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Senate bowed, the people rejoiced, and the world slipped quietly into empire. Years later, as the marble of the Forum gleamed beneath the Italian sun, an old senator wrote that freedom had not fallen by the sword, but by consent, given piece by piece in exchange for safety and order. In that silence, Rome rested. The wars were over. The legions stood at the edges of the known world. The streets of the capital thrummed with trade and laughter once more. Yet beneath the calm surface, something older stirred, a memory of the Republic that had been, of voices once raised in defiance. The names of Caesar, Pompey, Brutus, and Antony became legend, their fates woven into marble and myth. And though the empire would endure for centuries, every emperor who followed would live in the long shadow of those civil wars, knowing that Rome had learned the cost of greatness. In the end, the Republic had not been conquered by its enemies, but consumed by its own ambition. Its glory turned inward until it devoured itself. When night fell over the 7 hills, the lamps of Rome flickered in the wind, and the Tiber carried their reflections toward the sea. The world was quieter then, but beneath the quiet there lingered the faint echo of marching feet, of trumpets fading into the distance, and of the whisper of a man beside a small river long ago, casting the die that would never be recalled. And so the Roman civil wars ended not with a single victory, but with a transformation that would echo through all ages to come, as the Republic faded into empire, and the dream of freedom gave way to the rule of one, leaving behind the lesson that even the greatest of nations can fall asleep beneath the weight of its own power, dreaming forever of what it once was and what it might have remained. Yet even in its surrender there was beauty, for from the ashes of its turmoil arose art, architecture, and peace that stretched from the deserts of Arabia to the mists of Britannia. The legions built roads that carried language and law farther than the Republic had ever dreamed. And in the long quiet after the wars, the Roman night deepened into legend. The marble city glowed beneath the stars, and history itself seemed to rest upon the still air, remembering forever the age when brothers fought, brothers, and when a river no wider than a whisper divided the world between the past and all that was yet to come.
The Macedonian Wars. The winds that swept across the Aegean Sea in the 3rd century before Christ carried the smell of salt, pine, and distant ambition. To the west, the Roman Republic was beginning to stir from its peninsular cradle, rising from the ashes of its wars with Carthage and turning its cautious eyes eastward. To the east, the descendants of Alexander the Great, those kings who had inherited fragments of his dream, still ruled proud and restless. Among them stood Macedon, a land of mountains and horsemen, its kings heirs to the conqueror's legend, but burdened by his impossible shadow. It was here, between the marble shores of Greece and the fertile plains of northern Illyria, that the long and weary story of the Macedonian Wars would unfold. A century of struggle that would see the old Hellenistic world bowed before the rising power of Rome. The first flicker of conflict began in the year 214 BCE, in the uneasy quiet following the First Punic War. Rome had defeated Carthage once, but still watched the Mediterranean with wary eyes. Across the sea, King Philip V of Macedon, young and daring, saw opportunity in Rome's distractions. He was a ruler of energy and ambition, descended from Antigonus and the proud line that had ruled since Alexander's age. His armies were disciplined and his phalanx deep, thousands of men in shining bronze, spears like a forest under the sun. In his halls at Pella, Philip dreamed not only of defending his realm, but of reviving Macedonian glory. The western seas beckoned, and the fall of Rome's enemies seemed to promise a chance to expand. But fortune and timing are cruel masters. When Philip aligned himself with Hannibal of Carthage during the Second Punic War, hoping to strike while Rome was preoccupied in Italy, the alliance proved hollow and ill-fated. The first of the Macedonian wars began not with mighty battles, but with uneasy maneuverings across the Adriatic. Rome's attention was divided, yet it would not ignore a threat that reached toward its eastern borders. The Roman Senate dispatched small fleets and legions to Illyria, forming alliances with Greek city-states long wary of Macedonian strength. The Aetolian League, Pergamon, and other Greek powers joined with Rome, seeing in the distant republic a tool to check the power that had so long dominated the north. For nearly a decade, the First Macedonian War lingered without decision. Skirmishes flickered like campfires in the dark, small raids along the coast, sieges of minor towns, shifting alliances as Greek leagues changed sides. Philip's fleet was too small to challenge Rome at sea, and Rome, still fighting Hannibal in Italy, had no strength for full conquest. Yet the war served its purpose. It drew the eyes of Rome toward Greece, and it marked Macedon in the Senate's mind as a kingdom not to be trusted. By 205 BCE, the Peace of Phoenice ended the struggle, leaving Philip intact but wary. He had gained little, but Rome had learned much. The geography of the Aegean, the temper of its kings, the politics of the Greek leagues. The seeds of greater conflict had been sown. When Hannibal fell and Carthage lay broken after Zama in 202 BCE, the Republic stood supreme in the west. But victory did not bring rest. The senators of Rome, cautious of distant threats, began to cast their gaze beyond the Adriatic once more. Reports reached them that Philip V had turned his arms eastward, allying with Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire and attacking the wealthy cities along the Aegean coast. Rhodes, Pergamon, and even the free Greek cities that had placed their trust in Roman friendship. Merchants from the eastern seas came to the forum, whispering of Macedonian fleets, of plundered islands and threatened trade. Rome could not ignore the insult, nor allow any power to control the narrow seas that linked east and west. In 200 BCE, the Senate declared war again. Thus began the Second Macedonian War. Now, Rome came not as a distracted participant, but as a deliberate conqueror. The consul, Titus Quinctius Flamininus, young, eloquent, and ambitious, led the legions across the Adriatic. Unlike his predecessors, he came with a vision not of destruction, but of liberation, a promise to free Greece from Macedonian tyranny. The Greeks, divided as always, listened. Some distrusted Roman motives, others saw salvation. The Aetolian League again joined Rome, as did the cities of Corinth, Chalcis, and Thebes in time. Against them stood Philip V, proud, isolated, and unwilling to yield the dream of his forefathers. The armies met amid the mountains of Thessaly. At Cynocephalae in 197 BCE, under the grey dawn mist, the fate of Macedon was decided. The Roman Manipular Legion, flexible and swift, met the rigid Macedonian phalanx on uneven ground. Philip's men, locked shield to shield, advanced like a bronze wall, their long pikes thrusting in perfect rhythm. For a moment it seemed as if the old ways would prevail, yet terrain and adaptability turned the tide. The Roman cohorts, seizing the high ground, outflanked the phalanx. When the left of Philip's line faltered, the Roman right swept in, attacking from the side where the long sarissa could not turn. The phalanx broke, then fell amid the splintered spears, and the plain ran red with the fall of Macedon's pride. After Cynocephalae, Flamininus called the Greek leaders to the Isthmian Games. Standing before a vast crowd in Corinth, he proclaimed that Rome had come not to enslave, but to liberate. The Greeks are free, he declared, and his words were met with thunderous applause. Statues were raised to him, hymns sung, temples dedicated. For a moment, Rome was hailed as the champion of Hellenic liberty. But beneath the joy ran an undercurrent of unease. The Greeks were free in name, yet Rome's influence lingered in every decision, every alliance. Philip V was humbled, forced to abandon his fleets and pay tribute, but his throne remained. He returned to Pella a wounded king, his dreams shattered, but his resolve hardened. For nearly 2 decades, Philip V rebuilt quietly. He fortified his borders, trained his sons, and nursed his resentment. Rome, meanwhile, turned its attention to new threats, the Seleucid Empire and its king, Antiochus III, who dared to cross into Greece, proclaiming himself the liberator of the Hellenes. In truth, Antiochus sought what Alexander had once held, a world united under Eastern command. The Romans met him in battle at Thermopylae in 191 BCE, the same narrow pass where Leonidas had once stood. This time, it was Rome that held the pass, and Antiochus that was forced to flee. Pursued into Asia, the Seleucid king was finally crushed at Magnesia, and the might of the East bent beneath the Roman standard. Greece trembled, for though Rome spoke of freedom, it now commanded obedience. Philip V watched these events with grim fascination. He aided Rome against Antiochus, hoping to win favor, but the Senate's gratitude was shallow. Roman commissioners continued to harass his borders, demand restitution, and stir discontent among the Greeks. By the time of his death in 179 BCE, Philip's faith in Rome was long broken. His final years were darkened by tragedy within his own house. He had executed his eldest son, Demetrius, on suspicion of Roman sympathies, leaving the throne to his younger and more ruthless heir, Perseus. Perseus of Macedon came to power amid intrigue and bitterness. Cautious, intelligent, and ambitious, he sought to restore the dignity of his kingdom while avoiding open war. Yet his every move was watched by Rome, whose diplomats filled the courts of Greece like shadows. Perseus married into the royal house of Epirus, forged ties with Rhodes and other states, and strengthened his army. He revived the traditions of the phalanx, trained his soldiers in the old discipline, and filled his treasuries with gold. But, to the Roman mind, any strengthening of Macedon was a threat. Rumors spread in the Senate that Perseus plotted to unite Greece under his crown, that he sought allies in the barbarian north, and that he courted rebellion among the Hellenic cities still under Roman sway. By 171 BCE, tension boiled over into the Third Macedonian War. This time, Rome came with all its might and little pretense of liberation. The consuls of the Republic marshaled legions seasoned by wars in Spain and the East, while Perseus gathered his phalanx upon the plains of northern Greece. The early campaigns went in his favor. He defeated the Roman praetor Licinius at Callinicos and pushed the invaders back towards Thessaly. Greek sentiment began to waver. Perhaps Macedon might yet stand, but Rome, patient and relentless, sent new armies and new generals. In 168 BCE, Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus took command. He was a soldier of experience and calm wisdom, more statesman than conqueror, but utterly determined. The two armies met at Pydna, near the foothills of Mount Olympus. It was June, and the air shimmered with heat. The Macedonian phalanx stretched across the plain in glittering ranks, each man armed with a long sarissa and protected by bronze and linen. Behind them, the royal camp glittered with banners and chariots. The Romans stood in manipular formation, smaller units ready to move independently, each shield bright with the insignia of its legion. Yet when the battle began, the Macedonians advanced steadily, driving the Romans backward with the weight of their spears. The phalanx seemed invincible again, as it had in Alexander's time. But then the ground turned uneven, the line wavered, and gaps opened between the ranks. Paulus saw the moment and struck. He ordered his cohorts to slip into the openings, to attack not from the front, but from within. The close order of the phalanx, once its strength, became its doom. The Romans hacked upward beneath the spears, cutting down the exposed men. Horses screamed, armor rang, and the field dissolved into chaos. By sunset, 20,000 Macedonians lay dead, and Perseus fled into the mountains, his kingdom shattered. The fall of Macedon was swift. Paulus entered Pella as a conqueror, his soldiers astonished by the wealth of the royal palace, the gold, the tapestries, the works of art that spoke of centuries of kingship. Yet Rome showed no mercy. The monarchy was abolished, the land divided into 4 puppet republics, forbidden to intermarry or trade freely. Roman commissioners stripped the temples and demanded tribute. Perseus himself was captured and brought to Italy, paraded through the streets in Aemilius Paulus's triumph. Once a king, he walked in chains, his eyes hollow beneath the laurel of his conqueror. Some said he died of grief in captivity, others that he lived long enough to see how completely his people had been undone. But history, ever restless, had not finished with Macedon. The decades that followed brought uneasy peace, then rebellion. Greek resentment grew as Roman governors meddled in local affairs and levied taxes that bit deep into once prosperous cities. The promise of liberty proclaimed by Flaminius now rang hollow. In 150 BCE, a pretender arose in Macedon claiming to be the son of Perseus. His name was Andriscus, a man of obscure birth but sharp cunning, who played upon the memory of Macedonian pride. Gathering exiles and mercenaries, proclaimed himself king and rallied the discontented. To many Macedonians, weary of Roman rule, he seemed a deliverer. He raised an army and, for a fleeting moment, restored the banner of the old kingdom. Thus began the Fourth Macedonian War, brief but fierce. Andriscus defeated one Roman force near Dium, astonishing the world with his audacity. For the first time in generations, Macedonian soldiers once again marched under their own standard, yet his triumph was short-lived. Rome responded with a full measure of its discipline and wrath. In 148 BCE, the consul Quintus Caecilius Metellus met Andriscus near Pydna, upon the same ground where Perseus had fallen 20 years before. The outcome was no different. The Roman legions shattered the rebel phalanx, and Macedon's last dream of independence died with it. Andriscus was captured and taken to Rome, where he walked the same path of humiliation as Perseus before him. With that, the long saga of the Macedonian Wars came to an end. The Senate decreed that Macedon would henceforth be a Roman province. Its borders were redrawn, its cities garrisoned, and its resources absorbed into the growing machinery of the Republic. The Hellenistic world, the kingdoms that had once sprung from Alexander's conquests, was now under Rome's shadow. To the south, Greece itself would soon share the same fate. The year after Macedon's fall, Corinth was sacked, its treasures carried off, its people enslaved. The torch of the old Greek world flickered and dimmed, leaving only the marble bones of its temples and the echoes of its philosophers. Rome, the once provincial republic of Latium, now stood as master of the Mediterranean. Yet in the quiet that followed, the memory of Macedon lingered like an old song. Travelers who crossed the plains of Thessaly spoke of broken columns and silent cities, of the ghosts of phalangites, whose spears still glimmered in the moonlight. The Roman soldiers who garrisoned Pella walked among ruins that seemed older than time, their Latin tongues stumbling over the names of heroes carved in Greek. And scholars, sitting in candlelight centuries later, would look back upon that century of struggle and see in it a turning of the ages, the moment when the legacy of Alexander yielded to the dominion of Rome. In the long arc of history, the Macedonian Wars were more than battles between kings and republics. They were the slow passing of a world, the transformation of the Hellenistic kingdoms, vibrant with art and philosophy, into provinces of an empire governed by law and discipline. The phalanx had yielded to the legion, the diadem to the consul's fasces. Yet the spirit of Greece did not die. In the centuries to come, its language, its learning, and its gods would flow into Rome's heart, shaping its art, its literature, and its very thought. The conquerors became, in their way, the inheritors of what they destroyed. And so the story ends as it began, with the wind over the Aegean, carrying whispers of forgotten kings. On the hills of Macedon, where the ruins of Pella lie buried beneath wildflowers, the stones still remember the tramp of armies and the echo of trumpets. The sea is calm again, and the centuries sleep. But if one listens long enough to the waves against the shore, one might still hear the faint murmur of spears, the last breath of a kingdom that once dreamed of ruling the world, and the steady march of Rome that turned that dream into dust.